Putin's made a lot of these big bombers being symbols of Russian military prestige. He himself has been photographed in a Tu-160, the supersonic bomber, and closely aligned himself with it. The fact that the Ukrainians are now picking them off almost at will picks away at that entire Russian sense of self and of Putin at the top of this big military machine. And so there's a political psychological element to this targeting as well, and that's aimed purely at the politics, the negotiation, and everything else that's going on at the moment.
How much psychological impact do you think it will have then on Putin and on the Kremlin?
Well, I don't set myself up as a Putin whisperer, but across the military polity, you can just. I know how we would feel if we had fallen for something like this, and one had to turn around to the Prime Minister and explain that all those very expensive strategic assets with which he had been closely associated as he goes into negotiations with Trump and Zelensky have all just been wiped off the battlefield in one audacious move by the opposition. And you look at the Russian mill bloggers who have talked about it now. There'll be those seditious elements through Russia will say, "Look, we've fallen foul again. This is all going very badly." So, to the collective psyche, it will be a blow. I don't think any one blow is going to knock Putin himself off his perch, but it will subtly alter that balance. And I'm not the first commentator to point out that. And President Trump said to Zelensky, "You haven't got any cards." Well, he's shown he might just have a few.
How big do you think the impact will actually be on Russia's ability to conduct long-range missile strikes on Ukraine at this moment? Will it be immediate?
Yes, I think some of those aircraft had live weapons loaded, and all the raids, as I said before, have seen waves of bombers, and that's why they were back, up to 4,000 miles away, in the east, because they were so valuable to Russia that the Ukrainians have pushed them back by threatening them with more conventional munitions and more conventional attacks in the bases where they were based forward. So the fact that the Russians have put such effort into trying to protect them and have used them on all of these sort of psychological bombing raids against Ukraine just shows how important they are to the Russian strategic effort.
And in terms of these raids, these specific raids on Russian airfields, do you think that this is the start of a campaign, or is it a one-off?
It's certainly not a one-off, but I'm linking that now to what I just spoke about with the Black Sea. I'm linking it to other Ukrainian operations. That asymmetric approach will continue. Whether you will find more trucks parked up outside airfields, I don't know. I wouldn't like to say, though. To me, it is fascinating that the Ukrainians have sort of almost given away the secrets of what they did so early, because they obviously believe that will sow doubt and worry and have a very important secondary effect across Russia. Probably implies, therefore, they won't do something very much exactly like this again. But they will certainly, as this was planned 18 months ago, have more ideas about how they can continue this asymmetric campaign. So you can expect to see Ukraine working out how a smaller country takes the fight to the bigger country using asymmetric means.
The White House spokeswoman, Caroline Leavitt, she said that Donald Trump was not informed in advance of this operation. How unusual is that?
I suspect it's going to become increasingly usual. And often these things are only signalled quite late anyway. The major campaigns, when you're looking to, and more conventional campaigns, when you're looking to sustain them in a conventional manner, you may remember the Ukrainian counteroffensive, as it was called, of the other summer. Well, of course, that will have been discussed with NATO and planned, and but raids like this depend on operational secrecy, and at the moment, I would imagine Zelensky is not quite sure exactly who he can trust where, and therefore I think he is going to probably hold his cards as close to his chest as he ever has.
But also really interesting that when President Putin actually chose to broker silence, we're told by Trump's camp that it was in a phone call to him where he's talking about how he's going to retaliate. And he'll be working hard to try and win the US round to abandoning its support for Ukraine for this reason, presumably, and making all the kind of usual accusations it does of terrorism. Was it a mistake, perhaps, to not have informed the US?
Zelensky will have weighed up what the chances were of someone somewhere leaking that back to the Russians, I'm sure, or being told, don't do it because I'm going to be able to do something. So there is a well-known military phrase, which is, it's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. When you have a bit of a high-risk gamble that might come off and give you a real win, but equally the more cautious elements, even on your own side, might say not worth the risk. I think Zelensky probably called this one correctly.
And when the Ukraine Special Envoy, though, Keith Kellogg, characterised the attacks on the airfields as being escalatory, and that Ukraine is trying to say we can play this game too, raising the risk levels, he says, and it's unacceptable. Is he right in the nuclear context?
Well, many people have pointed that out, but if Russia is using these aircraft for the conventional attack against Ukraine, then Ukraine's completely within its rights to try and remove them from the battlefield. It also leaves a heck of a lot of Russia's nuclear arsenal and the main planks of its nuclear arsenal intact, and including all the command and control and the early warning and all the other elements which are the really sensitive elements of it. So it's a consideration. It shouldn't be overstated.
Do you think that there's a connect between that kind of attack and the situation on the battlefield? Is there a joined up strategy here?
Well, I would like to say yes, because I know the advice that I and many others have been passing to the Ukrainians is you don't get bogged down in a grinding land war which only plays to Russia's strengths. What you need to do is collapse the Russian war effort from behind, and they're demonstrating that that's what they are doing. And these particular strikes, though, that's at the operational level, really. These particular strikes are more strategic than that. They're demonstrating to Russia that nowhere in Russia, is safe, and they're demonstrating that if you come and try and attack the critical national infrastructure on our homeland, we can attack your critical infrastructure too. So I think there are some linkages, yes, that will reinforce, but there's not a direct connection to the battlefield.
Yeah, and to that point about attacking critical national infrastructure, interesting also that this was also around the talks that were going to take place in Turkey. And then after that, there were those attacks that were carried out in areas of Russian-occupied Ukraine, which took out electricity substations and switched the lights out. No coincidence, presumably.
No. But both sides are going into negotiations, as you would expect, trying to show that they have levers to pull.
You've been watching Frontline for Times Radio. If you'd like to know more about the war in Ukraine, you can subscribe and sign up for a membership. You can also get more analysis by listening to Times Radio or read thetimes.com. But for now, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.